Alright guys, this video is going to be a kind of discussion of the gear position sensor on the Intimidator GC1K. I'll give you a quick rundown on principle of operation, some diagnostics, and how you may not be able to create a tool, but a dealer may be able to create a tool for you to use to help you diagnose a faulty gear position sensor. So here's the new OEM one. It's got this end on it. Part number 926807. What you'll experience if you have a faulty gear position sensor is you may get an exclamation point on your screen even when you're in gear or in position or proper position. Sometimes adjustment of the shift cable, there is possibility. So to preface what we're going to talk about today, this isn't a catch-all, hey, if you're having an exclamation point on your screen, that's your issue. This is probably the most complex, solution or repair. So working your way backwards, the tool is here to isolate the worst case scenario out of the situation. But it is not, hey, you have an exclamation point, that's your problem. There is a relay box, and then you have, all the electrical connections and wiring from the relay box up to the screen. And then you also have just a simple adjustment, just not being quite in the right spot. So obviously you want to rule out the easy things, but when you get to this point, unfortunately this gear position sensor requires the removal of the transmission to get to it. So we developed this tool to be 100% sure that that is our issue before we start removing transmissions and swapping parts. Couple of the symptoms that I have experienced with a gear position sensor, I have seen a few units where it would operate just fine, and then once the machine got warm, then it would act up. So it isn't a static test. You need to do it while it's warm, or if you're experiencing when it's a loss of gear selection when it's warm. I would think this one, basically I had a customer that would be driving in high, cold, it would operate like normal. You drive, all of a sudden it'd get hot and it would boom, fall on its face. Well, it would fall on its face because it would lose the indication that it was in gear, and then the engine would, the ECU would kick on the rev limiter. So, and start acting up. Cool down, no problem. Warmed up, same thing. Had the same instance in reverse for a customer. And that one wasn't necessarily warmth or related, but yeah, every once in a while it would lose that indication that it was in reverse, and it would sit there and chug and spit and sputter going in reverse, because he had an exclamation point on the screen. So that's kind of the symptoms that I've experienced with a faulty gear sensor. Other things I've experienced, obviously, just being out of adjustment. I have seen some of the pins, not necessarily these pins here on this connector, but pins on that relay box backed out or just not quite right or bent or something like that. So definitely rule out the easy physical connections, like, hey, this needs to communicate with this. Connections are good, clean, everything's in proper adjustment before you get to this. So how this operates, which we had to kind of figure out on our own, is it actually grounds the relay. So there's a small voltage, I don't know if it's full voltage, I don't remember from when our testing. There's a voltage that goes to each of these wires, and the black is your ground. So when this operates, this switch, you'll see there's a little metal pin that goes on inside the engine, makes contact between ground, which I'm assuming is the center, and whatever gear that you're in. So this rotary spring-loaded thing goes from each one and creates continuity for the voltage to then actuate the relay control box. So what we did to create a diagnostics tool to isolate this out of the question is I took a bad or an old gear position sensor. I cut the wires off of the sensor, and then I just put spade connectors on it. So I put a flat spade connector on my ground, because it's always going to go to ground, so that way you don't screw anything up. And then each one of these wires, I don't remember the pinout or the coloring on them, but each one of these wires is going to be park, reverse, neutral, high, and low. So depending on which one you put it into is what it should indicate on the screen, assuming, you know, this is the last thing in that could be wrong. So now if you did have one of these tools, you can actually use this to quickly isolate, because if you do this and go through each of your gears like this, eliminating the sensor, and you still have issues, well, then you know the issue is to the front of the gear sensor. It is not your gear sensor then. Well, it could still be your gear sensor, but you have other issues to resolve to confirm that it's not your gear sensor. So this isolates that. So this is basically a static non-switch connection. You know, again, park, reverse, neutral, high, and low. And when you plug that in, that's what it's going to read on the screen, assuming everything else is working properly. So very, very handy tool if you're a dealer or diagnosing these things on a regular basis. Last ditch result if you are a end user diagnosing and repairing on your own, because obviously once you snip it, it's snipped. I suppose if you leave yourself enough cabling, you could repair it if you misdiagnosed and this didn't help you. So if you do end up doing something like that, I recommend using cutting and using a Deutsch connector or something like that for a quality repair on this. Don't just use, this is just like this, open-ended spade connectors, because it doesn't matter. It's just a tool for us. But if you happen to think that it's that and you cut it and do this whole process and then, oh, that wasn't it, well, just make sure you repair it properly. Otherwise, you will have connection issues. So again, that's a quick discussion of gear possession sensor. I'm Zach over at Benson Power. Like and subscribe for more quality content on the Intimidator UTVs. Take care.